When a card costs 2 mana of the same color, it tends to be pretty powerful for the mana value. This is because in order to consistently have those 2 mana of the same color, especially on turn 2, you need to have a substantial commitment in your mana base to that particular color. Additionally, this type of card tends to have some extra color appropriate effect. For example, when you pay 2 blue, you often get a Counterspell or a powerful Merfolk. And in this video, we'll be looking at the best cards you can get for that mana investment. In all, there are 83 cards that cost exactly 2 blue mana, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Merfolk Trickster, the first of many Merfolk on the list. For 2 blue mana, and that will be the last time I say that, otherwise it's going to get repetitive, it's a 2/2 Merfolk with Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap target creature an opponent controls, and it loses all abilities until end of turn. That's quite the enter the battlefield ability, especially on a creature with Flash, as it can allow you to drastically alter one of your opponent's creatures, even after it attacks. Sometimes taking away a card's text box is more than enough to let you take it down in combat. You can of course also flash it in to tap down a creature before it attacks, or just do something like turn off a static ability. While it was in Standard, its points came in mono-blue tempo decks, and it's also found significant success in both Modern and Legacy, where it appears in Merfolk decks that can get some extra value out of its creature type. It's going to keep gaining points, and it has a pretty solid shot and moving higher on the list in the future. At number 9, it's Deprive. It counters a spell, and as an additional cost to cast it, you return a land you control to its owner's hand. Paying 2 blue mana to counter something is a tale as old as Magic itself, and this is one of many such cards on the list, as I hinted in the intro. Returning a land as part of the cost is definitely downside, but it's often worth doing for a 2 mana spell that can counter anything. In Standard, it was played in one of the most dominant decks of all time, Caw-Blade, a blue-white mid-range deck, as well as seeing play in blue-white and blue-black control. It's also found significant success in a variety of modern control and mid-range decks. It became especially popular after the printing of Mystic Sanctuary, since you can turn Deprive's downside of bouncing a land into your hand into some upside, since the Sanctuary lets you put an instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library when it enters, creating a bit of a soft lock alongside Deprive. Eventually, the Sanctuary got banned because of shenanigans with both Deprive and Cryptic Command, and Deprive hasn't gained any points since then. At number 8, it's Tidebinder Mage, another Merfolk. This one's a 2/2, and when it enters, you can tap a red or green creature an opponent controls, and that creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control the mage. When you can trigger this, it's pretty close to just being a 2 mana 2/2 that kills an opposing creature, and that's some serious business. While it might look like it would mostly be a sideboard card, it's actually gained the majority of its points in the main deck. It has something to tap down more often than you'd think, but even when it doesn't have a target to tap down, the decks that have played the mage still find a way to get value out of it. For example, in Standard it was played in Devotion to Blue, where the mage was really good for raising your devotion early. It also sees play in Modern and Vintage Merfolk, where its creature type is really important. It's gaining points rather slowly these days, but it is still seeing some play in Modern right now. At number 7, it's Boomerang. Well, it's not a Merfolk or a Counterspell like most of the cards on this list, but it still does something super blue. After all, it's an instant that returns target permanent to its owner's hand. That's a pretty good deal, especially because it can go after any permanent, including lands and your own stuff, which makes it so Boomerang can almost always do something significant. Part of the reason for its high score is lots of reprints. It was printed the first time in Legends, but it's been reprinted in Mirage and 5th through 9th edition, which has led to it having lots of time as a standard and extended legal card between the mid-90s and the mid-2000s. In its first standard run, it found success in Magic's first prison deck, which was built around Stasis. It could give you the ability to slow your opponent down ahead of shutting the game down with the prison enchantment, and you could also use it later in the game to bounce your own Stasis so you could untap as normal. In a later standard format, it was part of one of the sweetest tournament decks ever, Owling Mine, which sought to make the opponent have a ton of cards in hand so that Ebony Owl Netsuke would wreck them, and Boomerang had the double effect of allowing you to bounce the card back to their hand And if you happen to bounce a land, it also meant your opponent would have a hard time casting their spells. And in Extended, it found the most success in blue-black control. Boomerang also sees lots of play in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal, where it's generally played in control decks. Boomerang's going to keep gaining points in the future, and if it ever gets a standard legal reprint, it has a shot at gaining lots of points. At number 6, it's Lord of Atlantis. Originally printed in Alpha, this card has really stood the test of time. From the beginning, it was established that Merfolk were super blue. It's a 2/2 that gives other Merfolk +1/+1 and Island Walk, so it's no secret what kind of deck this has been played in over the years. Merfolk decks first emerged on the competitive scene in 1998, and they have never really gone away. The Lord has put up points in every single Magic format it's ever been legal in, and it's usually a crucial card for those Merfolk decks. It offers a super efficient boost to your whole board, and most Merfolk decks run ways to turn opposing lands into islands, so they're often unblockable too. Merfolk decks continue to be relevant in multiple formats, with Modern the format where they're the most active right now, and Lord of Atlantis is going to keep going along for the ride. If you're interested in learning more about the long history of Merfolk decks, I did do an entire episode of my deck history series covering them. At number 5, it's Narset's Reversal. So, the other 9 cards on this list are all cards I suspected would end up here when I started doing the research, but that's not true about the Reversal. This one surprised me. It lets you copy an instant or sorcery spell and then return it to its owner's hand, and you choose new targets for the copy. So, while it doesn't say counter target spell, that is effectively what it does, since it removes a spell on the stack before it resolves, and in this case you get a copy of that spell too. When this has a target, it's pretty insane, but being restricted to only instants and sorceries does mean it isn't really a card you should run in your main deck, and indeed, every single one of its 73 points have come out of the sideboard, where it's been played in Standard, Pioneer, and Legacy, with the vast majority of those points coming in Pioneer. While it's useful against any spell-heavy deck in Pioneer, it's particularly strong against Lotus Field decks. It's one of the strongest decks in the format, and it's normally very difficult to interact with. These decks look to untap their Lotus Fields a bunch and produce insane mana. But if you can interrupt one of their twiddle effects, it can really derail them, and probably most importantly, the Reversal even gets around Lier, who is often used to protect the Lotus Field player's combo from any type of interaction. Because Narset's Reversal doesn't technically counter a spell, you can still use it to put a stop to their combo with Lier in play. It's likely to gain more points in the future, since it's a good sideboard card against a wide range of strategies. At number 4, it's Mana Drain. It counters a spell, and then on your next main phase, you add an amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's mana value. While that last part is entirely upside today, back when it was originally printed, it wasn't because of mana burn, which meant you took damage when you ended a phase with unused mana. That said, even when that part hurt you sometimes, the card was still incredibly powerful. Most of the time you could make use of the mana without too much trouble. I mean, the card even got banned in Legacy in 2004, before mana burn was eliminated from the rules. So, it's just even better today. Countering a spell and then ramping into something awesome on your next turn is pretty sweet. Because it's never been unbanned in Legacy, the only format it's been able to gain points in for most of its history is Vintage, but it's powerful enough to even see some play there, although the format's free counterspells generally see even more play than this does. Mana Drain is going to keep gaining points, but that's true for the 3 cards in front of it too, so number 4 might just be the best it can do. At number 3, it's Counterbalance. As you can tell from the name, this is another card that counters spells, although it goes about it much differently than the other cards we've seen. This is because it's an enchantment that counters spells using a triggered ability. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you can reveal the top card of your library, and if you do, you counter that spell if it has the same mana value as the revealed card. That might sound way too finicky to work out consistently, but it isn't. Counterbalance has been featured prominently in both Extended and Legacy, and in both cases, Sensei's Divining Top is what unlocked its true potential. The top lets you manipulate the top 3 cards of your library a ton, and because there are so many cheap spells in those formats, it really isn't that hard to set things up so that you can counter opposing spells a huge chunk of the time. Sensei's Divining Top ultimately got banned in Extended, Modern, and Legacy, at least in part because of how it combined with Counterbalance. The combo was particularly nasty once Miracles came along because this gave you another great reason to manipulate your library. Even after the banning of Sensei's Divining Top, Counterbalance remains an important card in Legacy thanks to cards like Dragon's Rage Channeler, Brainstorm, and Ponder, which still give you some control over the top of your library. it's going to continue to put up points, but it has little chance of ever catching the 2 cards in front of it, like the number 2 card, which is Thassa's Oracle, the final Merfolk to make the list. It's a 1/3, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Your devotion is equal to the number of blue mana symbols and the casting cost of permanents you control. So you look at those X cards and you put up to 1 on top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And if X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. It didn't see any play in Standard, but in Magic's other formats, the Oracle has quickly proven to be a powerful win condition in decks that can easily find ways to shrink the library. Pioneer was the format where it first showcased its power, which it did alongside Inverter of Truth. The Inverter could shrink your library by switching it for your graveyard, allowing the Oracle's ETB ability to win the game quite easily. The combo ultimately got the Inverter banned in the format. It's continued to see some play since the ban, particularly in Landless Spy, which can mill the entire library before casting the Oracle. It quickly required a ban in Historic 2, where it could be combined with Tainted Pact for a very easy win. In Modern, it's gained a few points in Ad Nauseam decks, which generally seek to draw their entire library in a single turn, which means the Oracle is, yet again, easy to win with. It has more recently found success in Modern and Grinding Station decks, which look to mill the whole library and get tons of value out of doing so with Underworld Breach. Once you've milled enough of your deck, you can cast the Oracle from the graveyard and win. And it's been the most successful in Legacy and Vintage, where it is often combined with Doomsday, which lets you search up 5 cards and exile the rest of your library and put those 5 cards in the order you want them to be in. Obviously, this can easily set up an Oracle win. Thassa's Oracle is the premier alternate win condition in Magic that decks in multiple formats are using, and they're going to continue to use. But it's probably never going to catch the number 1 card on this list, which is Counterspell. It's pretty fitting that the number 1 card on this list is the original Counterspell and one of the original cards to cost 2 blue mana. Obviously enough, Counterspell is an instant that counters target spell, and that's it. While that makes this card super simple, it turns out paying 2 blue mana to counter a spell with no questions asked is a very powerful thing. For a long time, it was a card that was just always in Standard, but these days it's considered too good for the format and too good for Historic 2, where it's banned. But when it was legal in Standard, it was a format-defining card, and it's still quite heavily played in both Modern and Legacy, and there's not much more to say about it. The original Counterspell is still one of the best in the entire game, with only free counterspells and mana drain coming in ahead of it in terms of sheer power level, and it's just had a massive impact on the history of competitive Magic. So, those are the top 10 cards that cost exactly 2 blue mana. If you want to counter some spells or cast some Merfolk, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more that look at cards with particular mana costs, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.